Good. Okay, so welcome back. We actually had a training that started a little bit earlier today, so 4:45, we just took a quick break. So in case you're wondering why we're not doing the Pledge of Allegiance and that piece of at the beginning of our meeting, we actually already did that a little bit earlier in the afternoon. So we'll just continue on with our agenda. So I am looking for a consideration. Well, first I'm going to let you guys know, Becky is out of the state right now, in case you're wondering. So Assistant Superintendent Alexander is going to be helping this evening run the meeting with me. So thank you for that, Cynthia. And we'll get started with, do I have a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes from the January 26th, 2022 meeting as presented, barring any errors or omissions? Colin and Susanna, thank you for that. All those in favor? Yep, great. None opposed. Sorry, Zune, you're behind Cynthia. I couldn't see. All right, so adjustments to the agenda?
Yes, we have one adjustment to the agenda, which will be 7B, and that will be a COVID update.
Okay, great. So we will move on to 7A, which is the report from our board student rep, Piper.
Thank you. So this week at the high school, we today held a pizza party to represent our honor roll students and just recognize their efforts. The Freeport School Band and Chorus put on a show last night at our concert, and it went very well. Unified Basketball has their first game tomorrow versus Gray New Gloucester. Tonight is the women's basketball senior night versus Freiburg, and Nordic skiing also has Western Maine conferences tonight with alpine skiing's Western Maine conferences tomorrow. And we also started a community esports program, which is holding an information night tomorrow for anyone interested.
Thank you. All right, so 7B, this is our adjustment, which I think is you.
Yes, good evening. I would like to begin by thanking those who have reached out recently to provide feedback around masking, vaccines, and all things COVID. As we know, the pandemic changes on a daily basis, on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis, and case counts and new guidance. The SOP has changed at least 22 times, and navigating it all continues to be very challenging. Our latest challenge has been in determining requirements for our community programs for this summer. Catalogs have been arriving in the mailboxes, and our most recent catalog is now available online. Enrollments have begun. Over the last month, we have had several conversations about strategies to increase enrollment and simultaneously be able to provide some assurance that we will be able to keep our summer programs up and running. At the time of our decision in January to require vaccines, we were having record numbers of students with COVID, the worst local transmission we have seen in 2 years. For the month of January, we had 382 cases, drastically more than any other month, for a total of 67 cases from last year. Last year, with the low number of COVID cases, our youth summer programs rebounded fairly well. However, even with the low case numbers, our adult enrichment programs did not do that well. When looking at increased COVID numbers in January, we believed that the best strategy to increase participation numbers in these programs would be through requiring vaccines. This decision was reached through the collective thinking of the community programs team led by Peter Wagner. Peter then presented the idea to Superintendent Foley, who supported it and who informed the board. Camp Seaside operates under a separate set of standards. They must follow the requirements of the DHS licensing guidelines. These guidelines for daycares are more stringent than for the schools or other programs. As the guidelines stand today, we interpret them to believe that if we have a few positive cases, we would have to shut down the entire program while all participants quarantine. This would be a financial loss to community programs and would also be difficult for parents and students who are depending on that program for daycare this summer. For these reasons, and due to the increased January COVID cases, we decided to require vaccines in order to participate in Camp Seaside. It was from this thinking that we thought it would be easier for communication purposes and for systematic implementation that we required vaccines for all community programs that are being offered this summer. Again, this was a recommendation that came from the community programs team to the superintendent, who supported it and then informed the board. Since this time, we've had some feedback from the public, some of it disagreeing with the vaccine requirement and some of it thanking us for the requirement. We have revisited our rationale and want to continue with some of the same requirements while amending other requirements. We will continue to require vaccines for the adult enrichment programs for the same reason I just mentioned. We hope this will lead to increased enrollment with additional assurances of the vaccine. With the requirements of the DHHS licensing guidelines that govern the operation of Camp Seaside, we will continue to require vaccines for Camp Seaside participants. We believe this is the best way to ensure that we will be able to run the program throughout the summer without interruptions. However, based on the feedback and the ever-changing COVID landscape, we feel it's appropriate to remove the vaccine requirement from other camps and programs that operate under the Department of Education standard operating procedures. We will make these offerings vaccine optional. Even if we have several positive cases, we are hopeful that we will be able to keep the programs up and running, much as we have been doing in our schools recently. Included in the removal of the vaccine requirement are high school sports, youth sports camps, youth art and science camps, as these programs are among those not subject to the child care licensing requirements. We know that our June programs are still 4 months away. The guidance of the CDC may change several times, and we will continue to revisit our requirements as the CDC guidelines change and to communicate these changes immediately. There has also been some recent feedback about the masking requirement in RSU 5. There continues to be monitoring at the state level, Department of Education, and the Center for Disease Control about cases and revisions to the standard operating procedure. We continue to follow their recommendations. And as a reminder, our youngest learners in pre-K are not eligible for a vaccine yet. In order to avoid having to quarantine students, we will continue to require masking. I wouldn't be surprised if in the coming months there are more changes to the CDC recommendations and that restrictions may be lifted around masking, but that is just a prediction. We are eager to return to normal as anyone, but our focus continues to be on how to keep as many students in school 5 days a week for in-person learning. The recommendation from Superintendent Foley is to continue with universal masking until CDC recommendations change. We continue to welcome everyone's feedback, and collectively we believe we can provide the best education possible to our students, and we do appreciate your continued support and feedback. Thank you.
Any questions from the board around that? Maura.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that statement. Could you clarify, if we didn't have universal masking in schools under the current standard operating procedure, what the quarantine requirements would be? Thank you. If you know. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can answer that completely. We would have to do contact tracing. I don't know, Ray, did you have, looks like Ray has some.
The contact tracing we would have to do. Anyone that's not in pool testing or not vaccinated would have to quarantine from school.
And is that for 5 days or 10 days?
I believe it's 5 now, but that part I'm not positive on.
Okay,
Because that's not something we do because of pool testing and masking.
but it would mean lost instructional time.
For people who are not vaccinated or not in pool testing.
Okay, so if we didn't have the masks, then would the quarantine be longer? Sorry, I couldn't.
I think it's 5 days, but I'm not, Bonnie, is that right? It would be the 5 days
Okay.
if you're a close contact, only if you're unvaccinated or not in pool testing.
Okay,
So if you're in one of those groups, you would not need to quarantine.
okay, but if you're unvaccinated and not participating in pool testing,
You would be, if you're a close contact, it would be 5 days out.
you'd lose 5 days of school.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Cynthia, do you know if we have asked our legal counsel, are we allowed to make these distinctions between programs around vaccines?
Yes, we have consulted with legal counsel, and the program can decide on safety decisions. The board can overrule those, but there's no restrictions on authority, and it's not against any federal or state laws.
Other questions? Okay, so we are at the first public comment, and while I'm excited to see folks at the meeting. I doubt you guys are here to talk about the budget, but maybe you are. So just a quick overview of how the public comment period works. So we ask that folks come up to the podium, just tell us your name, where you're from. We ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. And if we have several folks that would like to speak, if you want to sort of queue up so we don't have folks waste time between folks coming up to the podium. That's sometimes helpful, and we do require masks inside the buildings, and so there are some up there on the desk or on the shelf there by Ginny. If folks need them, please help yourself there. All right, so.
Hi, my name is Raina Anderson.
Can I give you one quick thing, just so I don't interrupt you in the middle? As we get close to 3 minutes, I'll just let you know
Okay,
time.
perfect.
Time's coming up. Just
Perfect. I'm from Freeport. I have 3 young kids. I'd like to say first, thank you for taking into consideration our concerns and amending as you saw fit. I appreciate that. Let me just ask you this. If masks work, why aren't they working? If the vaccine works, why isn't it working? June 10th, 2021, Becky sent down an email stating that there were a total of 67 positive cases in RSU 5. February 4th, 2022, Becky sent down an email stating that there are 644 cases in RSU 5. According to the CDC website, Freeport has 87% vaccination rate. Why are our numbers so high when we're almost 100% vaccinated and wear masks? What is the definition of insanity? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. When are we going to move forward and try something else? When are you going to stop with fear-mongering? Families should be able to choose whether they feel it is necessary to vaccinate or mask themselves, not be forced into doing something they don't want, just to participate in the community. At this time, COVID is not the most significant risk for our children. Our children are suffering from increased social anxiety, depression, disordered eating, and attempted suicide. The numbers clearly show that these real health threats are on the rise. Depression and anxiety symptoms have doubled during the pandemic. 25% of our youth are suffering from anxiety symptoms. 20% of our youth are suffering from depressive symptoms. Our youngest learners are struggling to pronounce their words, and our atypical learners are presented with increased challenges in understanding social norms and expected behavior. These real risks to our children far outweigh their risks associated with COVID. The board must provide us with peer-reviewed studies that show masks actually work if they want to continually harm our children under these false pretenses. I have provided Becky with numerous fact-based peer-reviewed studies showing that masks provide minimal protection against stopping a virus. Becky has provided me with studies that take strategically chosen data points from multiple other studies to form a hypothesis that have not been peer-reviewed. I have also provided peer-reviewed studies showing that masking harms our children, socially, emotionally, mentally. What you are doing to these children is child abuse, and it must be stopped. Thank you.
Thank you, Raina.
Thanks, Raina. My name is Jackie Priestley. I'm from Freeport, and I have 2 kiddos. One will be starting in kindy next year. I'm here today as a concerned parent asking for a plan. We want to return smiles, normalcy, and hope back to the Freeport schools for the sake of our students and our teachers. I, as well as this whole group of parents behind me here, we're here to support this mission. We all agree. We recognize the ongoing challenges our school board and you all, the administration and teachers and staff, have faced, and the extraordinary efforts that have been made to keep our children in school full time. This has been a really difficult time for everyone on so many different levels. However, the ongoing COVID mitigation strategies our schools have upheld and the recent addition of the vaccine mandate to even just part of the children's summer camps is wildly concerning. We know so much more now than we did 2 years ago, and yet it seems we're moving backwards in our policies. It's time to change course, and that doesn't mean we failed, it means we learned. Now that we know better, now that we have more studies, and we know more, we need to do better. The concerned parents at RSU are simply pointing out that the detrimental effects on our children's mental, physical, and emotional well-being have far outweighed any minimal benefits perceived for this type of mandate and the continued masking mandates. The science is behind us. The CDC recommendations are changing by the day, and they're changing in our favor as well. Tonight we ask you to consider 2 things, and I will address them both now. The first is to remove the masking mandates in schools effective immediately, and remove the vaccine mandate requirement for any part of the summer camps. In regards to masking, according to the CDC, their updates, and a study conducted by a Tufts disease physician, the idea that our masks protect each other is obsolete. It's proven false. Basic masks do nothing, and surgical masks protect the wearer. So here's where we allow choice and recommend a surgical mask for those who want that extra layer of protection. Masking has increased negative effects on mental health as well. Directly from the CDC website is this quote: "Emergency room visits for suspected suicide attempt among young girls has increased 26% in summer 2020 and 50% in winter 2021 compared to the same periods in 2019. I could go on with similar quotes for different age groups. We are destroying our children's mental health at the expense of the very minimal protection from this virus that isn't going anywhere. There are already 4 states who have removed this masking mandate from the schools, and they don't have to do any of those things that you mentioned before. They're making quarantining optional, they're making masking optional. Your job as educators is to ensure the health and safety of our kids in a learning environment. But how can they learn? They learn by facial expression, they learn by emotion. They can't see any of that. They can't see any of that with their teachers or their peers. How are they learning? And that goes back to show what Raina's stats said about the reduced capacity in children and their learning, and the stats for all grades. In regards to mandating the vaccine, may I please just finish? It's very important. In regards to the vaccine, it's only approved under EUA for children, and it's unethical, if not illegal, to make an emergency use medical procedure compulsory. Not to mention, according to Aaron Seary, the attorney, the Informed Consent Action Network, we've consulted with him. Emergency use of this vaccine for children is also illegal, as there's no emergency. A Johns Hopkins study analyzed 48,000 children diagnosed with COVID-19 and found a mortality rate of 0 among those who did not have pre-existing conditions. Section 564 of the FDCA was passed by Congress to create a legal route to distribute these unlicensed and experimental procedures in event of bioterrorism or similar emergency. There is no emergency necessitating an EUA for COVID-19 for vaccine for children. And as such, there certainly is no emergency to require one for summer camps. Not only is there no emergency, the vaccine doesn't prevent infection or transmission. On top of what it does not do, an FDA study revealed excess hospitalizations and ICU stays due to vaccine-related myocarditis. Their own data suggests that benefits of mass vaccination in children 5 to 11 do not outweigh the risk, and I will hand you all the resources that I have. Health is about more than the mere absence of COVID-19. We cannot eliminate this virus. We must learn to live with it as we do the flu and make lifestyle choices that are best for each individual person. Whether it's natural immunity or approach to a vaccination, it should be up to the individual and the parents to make informed consent without repercussions. A choice is not vaccinate or no entry. The current policy is teaching our children that they are vectors for disease, and their schools and summer programs are hubs for infection that they must fear. It's
That's
enough.
5 minutes, I'm sorry.
There's no one else who wants to speak.
She can have my time.
I just have another paragraph. It's time for a return back to normal life. It's time to end the policies that are not working and have never worked. It's not making society or schools safer, but it's sacrificing our children's mental, physical, and emotional health. It's time to let kids be kids and teach them the value of caring for their own bodies and their own immune systems will do their job, especially for a disease with such low severity and high survival in children. It's time to let parents make the choice that's right for their children without judgment, whether that be that they choose the vaccine or they don't. Some choices are right for some and not for others, both on an intuitive and biological level. There has never been a one-size-fits-all answer to ending this pandemic, and there never will be. Our district is causing continued unnecessary harm to our children who are now facing segregation from our peers. They are creating a culture that says it's okay to treat someone differently based on their lifestyle choices. It's time for our school district to stop these fear tactics, support all the children and all the families. There is no emergency. I really hope you take this information to heart, and I ask all of you to step far back away from the federal coercion funding, and I really ask you, are you making the best decision for all of your students? Not one concerned parent here is trying to take away any parent's right to vaccinate or mask their own kid. We're asking for that same respect in return. Bring back choice.
Hello, my name is Mary Richardson. I am from Freeport. I have 4 children in the school district. The last 2 years, when this all first came out, nobody knew what to do. And we just blindly listened to what the CDC was telling us to do. And I understand that. We were all on board. We are now 2 years into this. What has the CDC been right about? Why are we still following them blindly? If you get the vaccine, you won't get COVID. Oh, are you kidding? How about Israel? That's where most of the data that all the other countries are getting from. The most vaccinated nation on the planet has the highest rate of COVID. The vaccines don't work. They're not thoroughly vetted, but yet that's going to be a requirement for anything? The masks don't work. We all know that. So why are we following the CDC? They don't make the rules for RSU 5. You do. The community does. So standing behind, oh, well, we're going to do what when the CDC changes their mind or when they send out new regulations or whatever, we'll follow that. That's not an answer. They can send out guidance. Plenty of states just this week lifted mask mandates against the CDC recommendation. So when are we going to stand up and actually be leaders and show our children that we are going to fight for them? My 2 youngest children don't even remember a time without having to wear a mask. How sad is that? They don't even know what some of their teachers actually look like, what some of their friends actually look like. They don't recognize them outside without masks. The amount of anxiety, depression, and mental illness that I've seen all 4 of my children and their friends go through in these last 2 years is ridiculous. The masks don't work. The vaccines aren't going to stop anything. It's an ever-changing virus, and it's here to stay. So what are we going to do for our kids? Are we just going to live this way forever? So what I did was, as of today, I look on the main CDC to get what their numbers are. Whether they're true or not, this is what they published as of 2/8/22. In all of the United States, only 20% of ages 5 through 11 are fully vaccinated, meaning actually got the second dose. 20%. So that tells me, from a standpoint of the United States, as a parent who's not 100% sure about this vaccine, that we don't know any long-term effects on, I'm actually in the majority here. I'm hesitant, because I'm hesitant about my children's reaction to a vaccine. I've had 2 children end up in the ICU with other vaccines. So I have a reason to be a little skeptical about this new one. For the state of Maine, 37% of 5 through 11 are actually fully vaccinated against COVID-19. 37% in all of the state of Maine. For RSU 5, and this number, I can't even believe this, but this is what they say. For ages 5 to 18, 95% of the student population is fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Why are we still, what's the deal? Is that not herd immunity? And by the way, I think 99.9% have already had COVID. My family just did. It was a little runny nose, a little sore. What's happening? Why are we still masking? For a disease that is 0.01% fatality. What I want to know is who from our community, these children in our schools, has anybody ended up on a ventilator in the hospital? Has anybody died in the school system? What is going on? It's like, I understand you want to protect, but this is going above and beyond. It's abuse. And our children need to live. They need, teach them healthy social habits, going and running outside, going to their summer camp, being healthy, having healthy immune systems, not wearing masks where they're breathing in all their own gook all the time. The studies are out. It doesn't work. So what is the magic number? 95% vaccinated. If that's not good enough, I don't know what is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Do we have anyone else?
This feels weird talking with a mask into a mic, but I'll go for it. My name is Michelle Allen. I'm a mom of 2 boys, an 8-year-old boy that attends Durham Community School and a 3-year-old boy that's not yet in school. My 8-year-old was in kindergarten when COVID started over 2 years ago. It impacted his routine, his access to public school, and he did remote learning to finish his first full year in kindergarten. He started first grade in the hybrid program, and we were very lucky that he was able to return to school full-time in November of 2020. I've been very pleased with the communications and the efforts from RSU 5, Superintendent Becky Foley, and our principal, Mr. Pidden. I've actually felt very lucky to be part of this school community. I graduated from Freeport, and lucky to have my kids still in the community. However, the science has changed. And what we're experiencing has changed, and it's time for us to make a change for our children and for our lives. We teach our kids every day, at school, at home, to accept others, and our schools are supposed to foster inclusive environments. COVID has created segregations due to individuals' medical choices. There are now 5 states today that have lifted the mask mandate: New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware, Oregon, and Massachusetts. That doesn't include the states that haven't been requiring a mask mandate. I appreciate that you have listened to our concerns, and I hope that you continue to listen to our concerns and follow the science as it has changed, because science is supposed to change, and do what's right for our children, our future. Tonight, I request that, as you guys have listened to our conversations, I request that you take this back and make considerations to drop the mask mandate in the school. Let it be an option. If you want to mask your child, you can mask your child. If you don't want to, you don't have to. If you need an extra K95, that's your choice. That's the beauty of living in this country. It should be a choice to wear your mask, a choice to get your vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Do we have any other public comment? Thank you.
My name is Shannon Fitzpatrick. My boys, Liam and Lachlan, attend Durham Community School, 2nd grade and kindergarten. I'm not going to sit up here and read facts or statistics to you, because thankfully I have a support group behind me that has done that. I'm going to come up here and tell you that the mask mandate needs to end. You need to put the choice in the parents' hands and let us decide what is best for them. It is not your decision, it is our decision. So end the mask mandate and listen to us as parents. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
My name is Todd Mellon. I'm from Pownell. I wasn't really planning on speaking tonight, so I don't really have anything prepared. But I would like to say, number one, thank you to the school board for opening up the school as quickly as you did in the fall of 2021 or 2020, I believe. Many other school districts stay closed. There's some that's still remote learning across the country as it stands right now. My kids really suffered when the school was closed, so having them back has been huge. It would be really nice to get back to normal. Looking around the room at all of us wearing masks. I wear a mask every day for work. I have for 30 years. I know how they work. I know how they don't work. If we're really going to protect ourselves, we have to be wearing the right mask. If we aren't wearing the right mask, if we're not wearing it properly, it's theater. We can see that in the cases throughout the school in the fall or in the last couple of months. I was away 2 weeks ago. My son's only contact was school, and he came down with COVID. He is vaccinated. He wears his mask every day. It's fairly obvious that this mask that I'm wearing right now is just for theater. If we really want it to be protected, we should be wearing a fit-tested N95 mask. That protects the wearer. It needs to be fit-tested for it to work properly. Otherwise, there's just a lot of leakage around these. For an aerosol-type virus, it's not really going to protect you. So getting back to what some of these people have been saying, if you are nervous about being here in the school, you should be wearing the proper PPE to protect yourself. Wearing an N95 with a beard is probably not working all that well, just to be perfectly honest. If we want to be safe, you should shave, you should wear a proper fit-tested N95 mask. And that's what it's all about. This is theater. We're trying to stay away from quarantining our kids any more than we need to. It's a guideline. We can stray from the guidelines. Just do what makes sense. Do what's logical. None of this is really logical. It's not really protecting our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Okay. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who came out and shared this evening. All right, so we will move on with the agenda. We do not have a superintendent's report, administrator reports, or policy. So we move on to the budget review, budget update. Cynthia.
Sorry. Good evening again. I just have a couple of things to mention about the budget update this evening. There was a question that Volley had posed at their last meeting to Craig about the athletic trainer, and asking if we could increase the number of hours that our athletic trainer, if Coastal Orthopedic would be willing to increase the number of hours that we contract for. Craig did make that phone call, and they are going to get back to him on that. So we'll give you yet another update on that. He did look at the 7 comparison schools that we do all of our comparisons with, and Yarmouth and Falmouth are the 2 that actually have a full-time athletic trainer, and they have their own. They have separate contracts, and they're nuanced a little bit. So. They're not under any generalized contract. And then he also went ahead and checked with all of the Western Conference schools, and he listed about 10 schools that all have full-time, at least one full-time athletic trainer. There are a couple that have 2, and one has 1.5. So we can give you the detailed information. But some of them are combined with an administrative position, some of them are combined with athletic director, and it goes on from there. So that's just the update that you had asked for from Craig last time. Thank you. All right, so up
First, for the department review is Instructional Support, Bonnie Violet. Is that right, or did you guys change your order?
Hi, I'm Bonnie Violet, Director of Instructional Support. And the first proposal we have is for an early intervention team. And there are 3 other administrators, Will Pidden, Lisa Demick, and Julie Nickerson, as well as the Department of Instructional Support asking for an early intervention team. So the total ask is $261,000. And it's really like, if you look at your handouts, it's parceled out with direct instructional support, and then each of the 3 schools having a piece of the early intervention team. So I'm just going to give a little, perspective on why we're looking at this. And then I'm going to ask Julie Nickerson to come up and Lisa Demick to just share what, their rationale for requesting this. Because essentially it's the same thing. So if we each come up, we're going to be saying the same, giving you the same rationale. So I'm just going to get started with the reason that we're asking for it, just overall, is because we have a state agency in Maine, Child Development Services, responsible for identifying students birth to 5 and providing services. And over the last few years, the services they've provided have been very inconsistent. And so what we're looking at is trying to fill some gaps because, the staffing has not been consistent. They haven't been able to recruit people. And sometimes some of the students are identified later and don't really receive services. So each of the schools is really looking at putting together a team. So I'm going to ask Julie to come up. I guess they're all coming up together. Okay, do you want to do the talking points?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. So this is an exciting ask in many ways to really shift how we support our youngest students. We're seeing definitely a change in need as students are entering our school with pre-K now that we've got almost universal. I think we can call it universal. Every child who wants a spot, we're able to give them at this point, which is exciting. That definitely was one of our goals as a district. And now what we're recognizing is our youngest learners with our highest needs are then, as Bonnie just explained, it's inconsistent as to those needs being met. So I just want to kind of paint a picture of the current situation and also how this will benefit all our students at the pre-K level and K. So there's a two-edged kind of part to this. So currently we have more than 30 students across our district pre-K programs, either with IEPs who are in the referral process to determine eligibility. These students might have speech, OT, or behavioral and or developmental needs. And we are generally seeing an increase in students arriving at school with needs that are not currently being addressed. So currently, once students have qualified for service, it's not guaranteed that Child Development Services are able to find a service provider to fulfill that need. And consequently, students have unmet needs and their deficits continue to grow. I was in an IEP meeting this week where the student needed three times 30 minutes of OT, but the OT available was only able to provide 30 minutes. That's kind of the reality of what is happening for many of our students right now. So having our own intervention team will mean that students with multiple needs will benefit from the team approach. Each provider will know each other's providers' goals and will be able to support the development of each of their sessions. For example, a speech pathologist might incorporate practice on OT goals within their session, even if the OT is in Durham and the speech therapist is in Moore Street. Like they'll be able to collaborate. The team will work closely with our pre-K and K teams to fully understand the expectations and philosophy of programming for all students, therefore working towards common goals instead of in parallel. Right now, those providers come on the days that they're providing service, but they're really not embedded as part of our team. So in order to maximize that work, the benefits of the collaboration, having them on staff as RSU5, part of our RSU5 team, will definitely help. The collaboration with teachers will mean they can also provide support for whole class should the needs arise. I know the speech therapist who's working in one of my pre-K classrooms has mentioned to the teacher that most of the students within that program would benefit from certain interventions. And so having our own team would mean they would have some time to really address some of those needs, because there's certainly students who we might think should qualify for speech services, and when we go through the process, they don't actually qualify. But it doesn't mean they don't still have some need, and then we're able to address it with a team that's our own in ways that we wouldn't be able to if CDS were providing that service. An RSU5 early intervention team will mean that our students will have a seamless transition from the service they receive age 3-5 and then to school-based programming, therefore setting students up for continued success. Students who are new in kindergarten and have not attended a pre-K program and may not have been identified will be able to receive developmental RTI. So this is the part that kind of bridges the K gap. There are definitely still some students that come to us as kindergartners, and they may have missed the screening process in the spring. They show up in the fall, and we recognize that there's need. But as soon as they enter kindergarten, the process is very different. We have to provide RTI services, which typically it has an academic focus, but if they come with a developmental need that typically would have been addressed under CDS, OT, speech, and kind of behavioral programming primarily, we're not equipped to do that. Like we're providing academic, but this team would be able to kind of bridge that gap for those children who have unmet need as 5-year-olds. Sometimes we ask for students to be referred for speech. Oh, I already said that one. And the reality also is that currently, if students in pre-K have a significant behavioral need, we're pulling from our school-based team. So that means, in my school, that means my math interventionist is often pulled to come and help support in pre-K, just because once behavior is externalized and impacting, that becomes the biggest priority in that moment. And so if pre-KK had their own team, we would be proactively addressing those in different ways to kind of get ahead of some of the things that we're impacted by. Did anyone else want to add? Do you want to add?
I think one of the only other things I'd add is the category of developmental delay is a category that actually goes away when kids are 5. So it's not an identifying qualification for our kids that are coming into kindergarten. So one of the things we've seen over the past few years is that CDS goes through the process of identifying someone, and then as soon as the student turns 5, they say, oh, they're no longer eligible to receive services. Or if they have been able to get services through CDS and then they come into kindergarten and still have some of those developmental needs, they aren't able to be addressed through our programming. We've had a little bit of an opportunity this year to see what this kind of integration could be like at Pownell, because we had 3 students who were identified either through their pediatrician or through Child Development Services, but Child Development Services wasn't able to provide any service providers, and we were able to flex some of our resource room teachers' time and our occupational therapist time to provide some services so they could get what they needed. And the difference was really about what Julie mentioned about being an integrated part of the team. So right now, all of our pre-K students are benefiting from additional fine motor support that the occupational therapist was able to co-create with my pre-K teacher. And, she has just seen that has been so much more beneficial than having sort of an outside person come in for 30 minutes and really not have the same level of collaboration. A few weeks ago, you were able to look at data and you were able to see the difference between kids who are socioeconomically disadvantaged and sort of the overall population. And what we know is that early intervention often supports those students. Access to primary care doctors right now and access to services before kids get into school for families that are struggling is just getting harder and harder. The wait lists are getting longer and longer. So it's often families who don't have the means or resources that are really struggling. And it's really much more beneficial the earlier that we can help them to get on the road to success. And it not only helps them, it helps all of their classmates as well, because the more regulated they are and the more successful they are, the higher functioning their classrooms can be as well.
The last thing I would add before passing it back to Bonnie is just that not only the team of administrators who work with our youngest children, but the whole administrative team recognize that this is a big ask. It's a big financial commitment. And we had wrestled with the model. We had considered, are there ways of phasing it in, or are there priorities over other priorities? But any which way we looked at it, it would compromise what we're trying to achieve. And therefore, when we had then shared it collectively and over this last couple of months of trying to work with it, we felt that this was really going to be the best model for children, but also, in essence, although it's a more expensive model, the best return on investment, because it's a realistic return on investment. And Bonnie has a bit just to add about some of that side of it.
So I just wanted to add that, when we looked at the total that we're asking for, the proposal is for $261,000. I looked at the number of students that we have in pre-K this year that have IEPs and the service time that they should be getting based on what is on their IEPs. And it looks like it's about 40% of the cost of the early intervention team. So I did have a meeting with the Department of Ed, because it is really their responsibility to pay for preschool services for children birth to 5. And we can get reimbursed for the services that students have that are on their IEPs. So when Julie talked about, having, collaboration with RTI and servicing students without IEPs that are not identified, that would really be a district cost. But the cost for the special ed piece, again, the district would be upfronting the money, but it looks like we would get reimbursed for 40% of the total cost. Any questions? Do you want to add anything? Okay.
Before I go to Maddie, do you want to, because you have another ask too, do you want to go?
I think we were going to just address the early intervention team first.
Okay, first.
Yeah.
Maddie.
This feels like really creative thinking, and I really appreciate the collaboration that has gone into this, and it's really helpful that we just reviewed all that data. So thank you for that work. It sounds like a pretty exciting prospect to me. I have a couple questions. The 40% you just mentioned that you think is reimbursable, that would I'm guessing that would only be for students who do actually qualify.
Yes.
So that's a risk. It could be 40% or less. Like if they turn 5 and they no longer qualify?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it could be 40% or less, or it could be 40% or more,
Okay.
depending on how many students we have with IEPs.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'm just wondering, is this something you've seen elsewhere in the state? Are there other districts that have the in-house support, or is this something that we're proposing building ourselves and starting something new? And in conjunction with that question, my recollection of the news is not perfect by a long shot, but I feel like Governor Mills just announced some spending, and I don't know if she's talking about it in this particular area, but anything that you have to shed light on that.
So I think other districts are doing similar to what we're doing right now. I think when they have children that need services and they're not provided through child development services, I think they call on their existing staff. And I think they do the best they can. One example, and I know other districts are doing something similar. This year we had a group of students in Durham that needed speech. And, we couldn't, use our, resource staff at Durham. So I reached out to an agency and we were able to contract for the speech services. But that's kind of hit or miss every year because sometimes we're able to do it if the agencies have staff and sometimes we're not. So I think overall, that's what our neighboring districts are doing. They're either using the existing staff or trying to reach out to other agencies that might have staff available. I think in terms of the way we're trying to do it in RSU 5, I think it's a more integrated approach. And I think, in terms of how we're going to service students, as Julie mentioned, it's very collaborative. And we're going to have our own team to call upon when we have, concerns or issues with students. And I don't believe that any other district is doing it that way. That being said, I think the Department of Ed, from what I understood when I met with them, I think they're very appreciative that we are looking at providing services because they recognize that they're not able to do it. And they did say that's a really creative way to support students. So I don't think that other districts are really doing it this way.
Jill.
Thank you for your presentation. I realize that, we want to meet the needs of these new learners coming into our school, especially if they have deficits. From a budget standpoint, it's very expensive to hire teachers, and you're asking for 3 new positions. So as I kind of try to think through this, because when I saw this ask, I thought we were asking because we needed them for our students, but it sounds like right now there's supposed to be something in place to meet these needs, and it's falling short. It sounds like there may be money if we're filling in gaps that we might get reimbursed by. But I think I need some more information looking at the minutes that our current special education staff are providing to our students. Because I'd like to know, you're saying they're filling in the gaps. I want to know if, do they have time to fill in the gaps? Because for me, that's important to know. I understand you're saying this is the best way in your mind to meet the need, but it's very expensive. So I just want some more information on are our current OT, PT, and special education teachers, are they at the max and we're asking them to go above and beyond? Or do they have time to fill in some gaps? Because, 3 full-time positions is a lot.
Yeah. So I can speak for, I know that Lisa mentioned that they were able to use the special ed teacher at Pownell, as well as we have an OT that is shared between Durham and Pownell, and she was able to pick up 1 student. But if we had a larger population at Pownell, we would not have been able to carve out any time. And the example I gave about contracting for services for the students in Durham, I can tell you the speech therapist in Durham would not have been able to provide the services to the number of students that we have identified needing speech in Durham. And that's why I reached out to see if there was an agency able to do it. And I think Julie spoke to, some of the students at Moore Street, they do get services through CDS. Some of them, as she said, one student needed, 90 minutes a week of OT and could only get 30 because that's all CDS could do. We had a student this year who needed support in addition to what was being provided in pre-K. And, CDS was not able to meet that need. So I think when you're asking, like, do we have staff in-house to do it? It depends on the school, it depends on the year, it depends on the caseload of the providers we have. But overall, I would say it's unlikely they would be able to do it because of the students that are K-12 that they're responsible for servicing.
I guess what I'm asking is just, I want some data. Like, I want to see what you have a staff and to meet the needs of our students with IEPs. So are we doing that now with our current staff? And if we're not, what is the need? Because I want to see the numbers to see if the need is 3 new positions.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
not saying, and I just think, to say, I have this student here, I have this student there, I'm sure there are students who have needs, but I'd like to see I want to see more data on that.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be tonight, but it would be nice to see that as we talk about
Mhm.
these positions.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I don't have the data to share right this minute, but we can get it for you. And I was just going to ask if the principals have data.
So I just want clarity on the data you want. Is it minutes available in our current staff schedule, or is it minutes that are required to fulfill IEPs at a pre-K level?
Well, I think it would be a mixture of the two, right? I mean, if we know that there's 200 minutes needed and we've only got 20 minutes available, well, there's the need, right? Whereas if it's 200 minutes needed and we're able to meet 190 of those, maybe that's not worth $250,000.
Right.
Also currently school staff as well as what is being covered by CDS?
So one of my questions is, are you replacing CDS altogether? Would you guys be able to roll that into what you're doing and get reimbursed for that as opposed to having CDS doing this sort of disjointed thing?
Yes, we could. We could provide what CDS is currently providing. And again, I don't have that data, but we can get that data for you. And we would get reimbursed for whatever that amount is of service that we're providing.
Got what you got?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's the clarity of, we have current special education staff, OT, PT, special ed teachers that work with our students that are K up.
Right.
At the elementary level. So I was just wondering, when we have these full-time employees, do they have time in their day after you look at what's required in the IEPs to help with the deficit in the pre-K level? But I'd like to see some numbers on that, not like this kid needed this here, I'd like to see some data on that when I'm making this decision. And I understand, I get, it would be lovely to have this team, but it is in the second priority. It is 3 full-time positions. I just want some more information on that moving forward.
Maura.
All right.
Could you clarify? I have a couple questions. Thanks for your presentation, all of you. Could you clarify this team isn't just for students with IEPs, correct? So if you're trying to count students who are missing services maybe, or that we can't serve, the point of the early intervention, and this is my understanding from what you've said, is students who may not qualify for services are then going to be getting them, whereas that wouldn't happen right now. Is that right?
Well, that's correct. And I think I'm going to ask Julie to speak to the whole RTI process, because the portion of the budget, the 40% funded through special ed, would really be for students with, identified disabilities with an IEP. But, the other schools have pre-K programs, and they're looking at using the staff to support RTI. Do you want to speak to that, Julie? and how you would do that? Okay.
So does everybody understand what RTI is? So we just
I was going to
assume-
suggest, because we have some new board members. you
Right,
might
should we
wanna-
just explain? So RTI is response to intervention, and it's a responsibility under general education that we respond when we see a need. And then it's also a requirement that we've provided RTI before we take students to referral. So it will Maura, you're right. Like there are certainly students who start to crop up and we start to have concerns about who we would intervene with quickly. And sometimes if we intervene quickly, there is no longer a need for referral for special education services. And then other times we intervene and that's still not the intervention needed to make progress, and our concerns continue to grow. And then we decide that it's time to refer for a special ed referral. But kind of the piece in this proposal that's kind of key is if a student comes to kindergarten without having had the support or provision of a pre-K program anywhere, and neither has been identified, that then the process takes a long time as a kindergartner before we are ready to commit, like, okay, we're ready to kind of take this child towards a special ed referral, and maybe we could be working under the RTI umbrella to kind of fill those gaps before they get bigger.
Thank you. And I just had one more question. I was wondering about the contracted amount for services under our current budget, or I guess how much we spent this year, comparing that. I think that would just be helpful to compare how much we spend on outside services already versus what the ask is in this budget. Not expecting you to know that offhand, but just
Do you
interested.
mean like for pre-K?
Yeah.
So basically, how much would we be saving by not having to pay an outside agency to bring in people to provide services? Because that would be a net against what we would be paying
That would be Bonnie's. I think anything provided for pre-K students who have IEPs is provided by CDS currently. So even when Bonnie gets agency speech therapists to come, CDS is billed for that, correct? That's it, and that's if they come. I think the cost benefit for us is the reliability of the intervention. Right now, there is even, they're providing it, but they're really not. They're responsible for providing it, but they're not. Their wait lists are so long. Our speech therapist who works at Moore Street also does some contracting with CDS in the summer and things like that, and she's constantly contacted, and there are at least 60 children waiting for speech service in our area.
Jen.
So I'm fully supportive of this team. I think it's a great idea. I think I think the collaboration that has gone into this just shows the strength of the schools in the RSU. I think the CDS model is kind of antiquated. I think it was created way before there was anything such as even like full-time kindergarten, as opposed to, especially like now we have, universal pre-K. We didn't have that. So I think that this is probably something that is on the minds of a lot of people. And I think that, I respect the fact that, as a team, you guys are coming up with this. Because I feel like this is something that probably will be, moving forward will probably be the norm. I also think just to tie in with the data that we had for the disadvantaged socioeconomic students, I think that was a big concern of ours. And I think this is one way to address it. I also think we also talk a lot about the dropout. And I know that when you are going back and looking at pre-K and kindergarten, it's hard to think of how that ties in with dropout, but it does. And so I think that this kind of addresses a lot of the things that are big priorities for this board. I think we just need to be, we need to make sure we think about that and how it's going to affect in a good way a lot of other things that we're trying to tackle. And I also think 40% reimbursement rate is pretty good And I think when we're separating it out, when each of the schools are dividing it up, it doesn't look as big. So I think it's a great idea. I appreciate all the work that you guys put into this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So the 40% that shows up in your ask, Bonnie, the expectation is based on your assessment, which obviously isn't locked, written in stone, but that 104,000 would be the reimbursable portion.
Yes, that's
Okay.
what I'm anticipating.
Okay. Piper.
I'd just like to speak. When I was, I think 4, I received speech therapy, and I was lucky that, I don't know if the Child Protective Services paid for it or my family itself, but it's very likely that my family was able to pay for it, luckily thanks to our financial spot. But I know if I didn't do that, I may be at a much lesser spot educationally. Like I may not be able to be in honors levels classes because I wouldn't have gotten the foundation I did. And I think that it's important that other kids receive the same treatment that I did. And we never know that where a kid could be if earlier in their educational career they were intervened and they received this therapy that they needed but were unable to get due to a financial spot or due to a lack of opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Piper. Vali, you good?
No, I just wanted to clarify that the reason why we need to include it in the budget is because we have to front the money, but then it will be reimbursed. So it really shouldn't be considered a complete ask as all the other asks that we see.
Any other questions around the early intervention team at this point? Colin.
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. And I also am really intrigued and excited about the creativity that went into developing it. And I also am very supportive of the desire to have more data on what the sort of existing landscape is in terms of what the resources that we currently have are within each of the schools. I suppose my question is, as you perhaps bring that data back to us, also to look at what Jen brought up in her presentation a number of weeks ago. Dr. Foley made very clear that we're failing a good number of our students when they're entering, as they move through, particularly, I'm just looking at the bar graph that I have, moving through grades 1, 2, 3, and 4, with particularly economically disadvantaged populations being, we're only meeting about 18% in grade 2 and 18% in grade 4. So I guess what I see in this presentation is a creative solution to trying to address part of that, given that we can't know it precisely who those students are that fall into the disadvantaged category. So I suppose just as you go back and gather data, I suppose just to, as part of perhaps the presentation of that, to be looking at, if not this, then what? Right. Because I think that I won't accept the idea that we can continue this way through with all respect given to how hard the administrators and the teachers and all the staff are working to provide this support, particularly over the last 2 years. So again, with a real understanding that the problem is clear and present, y'all are working really hard right now, but if it's not going to be this solution, then what solution is it? Because I think I'm not comfortable looking at this as either this or nothing. I think there has to be some other possibility in that as well, or else I don't know what to say to those parents of the second graders or the fourth graders to come. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting idea to look at just the number, right? I mean, if you look back at where, when you look at the growth of the enrollment, a lot of that was driven by pre-K. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't feel like, other than adding that pre-K teacher and the ed tech that supports them, we didn't add any additional supports for all of those kids that have come in, previous from, we had our speech therapists and our OTs and PTs, and I don't think we expanded that group when we added in a whole new grade of children into the district. So, I think that's probably part of the strain that's creating this, and an interesting, maybe another data point to look at when we're thinking about the need for this. I saw hands up in the audience, and just a clarification on process. While our meetings are all public, we don't have an opportunity to have questions from the public. So I did see your hands. I'm not ignoring them. That's just not part of what happens at our meetings. So, Maura.
Oh, I was just going to say there's another public comment period at the end of the meeting.
Yes. So if you had so if you had a comment that you wanted to share, but that also isn't an opportunity for like questions and answers. Vali.
Following up on what Colin was saying, obviously you don't have any data on cost associated with services that we're not providing right now because we're letting so many kids fall through. It would be very important that you include what the cost of other services that we could provide to these children would cost, so that we don't assume, like Colin said, it's either this or nothing. But if it's not this, the other alternative, how much would that cost, and compare it to this proposal that you guys created, which I fully endorse.
Okay.
Are we good with that group? I think, are you done, Bonnie? Or are you going to do your...
One more thing.
Yep.
If I can just add one thought to that, to sort of Valley and Colin's request. That's going to be very hard to quantify, like, what is Plan B? Because I mentioned it before that we had looked seriously at, could we do this with just a special education teacher? Or could we do this with just an OT person? And the conclusion we'd come to was that it was this approach that was going to be really the way to do it in a proactive perspective. So it would be very hard to quantify financially what a reactive, which is what Plan B would be, which is kind of where we've been in terms of adding RTI teachers to respond to challenges that occur. What we're trying to do with this model is to actually get ahead of the problems before they manifest into corrective work, which is so much harder to actually apply. So I wasn't sure if you were asking us to say what would be the alternative for pre-KK intervention, or were you asking what would be the response to children struggling beyond those early grade levels?
I suppose absolutely understand that it's very hard to talk about the problems that we don't know if they will emerge or how they will emerge. I suppose I am asking for something. I am asking for something quite difficult, which is I'm asking for not just the financial question, but also the question of, let's say that we go through this process and and as a board we decide to not fund this, just flat up. No, none of the three. We're just not going to do it. What's the impact of that on the students and on the teachers and on the administrators? What does that mean in terms of? Is it basically to say, yes, we're going to continue to see the numbers that we're seeing in terms of the, because that's where the trends are. We don't have to Jill's question, we don't have the minutes in the day to be able to allocate to that. So I suppose it's just, perhaps what I'm looking for is somewhat more of a holistic question of it, to say we're trying to address the need of the children, and if we don't meet it this way, how are we meeting it? And that part of that, or effectively saying we're not going to be able to meet it, and are you comfortable with that?
Yeah,
you could just answer your own question, Colin.
Well, no,
Great.
I wouldn't want to leave
good
it.
Answer.
I wouldn't want to leave it any perception that we wouldn't do anything we could to address it. It's what we're doing now, and I think that's kind of where that scenario is. So it's certainly not that we would ignore any child's needs. It's more about the capacity to meet those respective needs in as timely a manner as possible. I think the urgency is the piece that we're trying to address with a belief that in addressing these needs with the urgency we think they demand, with any luck, we would actually be seeing a benefit beyond just these particular students. But that, of course, is something to be seen, but it's what we would hope and anticipate. Right.
Does anybody miss Hattie's work where she would give us that number about the impact of, a decision and, what it actually meant in terms of impact to the kids? I bet you somebody's done a study, a meta-analysis on this, of the value of early intervention versus dealing with it through the years if they don't have that opportunity. Bali?
Yeah, those studies do exist, and I have read them. But going back to your question, Will, my request would be to assign a number to alternative preventive services. So this is a preventive approach. What would be the alternative preventive approach to address the same problem? And I'm sure you'll come up with something very similar, because there's a reason why you're providing this solution and not something else. But I'm also sure that there is something alternative that you could think of.
We'll certainly look at it. Great,
Thank you.
thanks.
Any other questions about that?
I think we're questioned out for the moment.
Okay, all right. So my other request is for an ELL teacher. 3 years ago, I was here saying, wow, our caseload of ELL students is very low. At that point in 2021, we only had 5 students, and we had a full-time ELL teacher, and we really didn't need a full-time person. So we ended up cutting the position to part-time. And now, this year, our numbers have increased. In fact, they've really more than tripled. Because, at the beginning of the year, they kind of doubled, really. At the beginning of the year, we were up to they tripled. We were up to 16. And then more recently, some of you, I'm sure, are aware that we have some new families coming, or they're being placed in Freeport through the Portland Resettlement Program. And so our numbers increased dramatically in just the last, I'd say, 3 weeks. So we went from about 16 students, we added 18 in 3 weeks. And that would be, they span all, the grades from kindergarten to high school. And interestingly, 4 have left, so we have 14. So we're at about 32 students right now. And my understanding is, the Portland Resettlement Program is planning to continue placing families in South Portland, Westbrook, and Freeport. So we're expecting additional families to be placed here. That being said, when we look at the need of the students, the numbers have increased, but the needs that we're seeing, again, spanning K through 12, some of the students that are coming into our schools really don't have any English. And so they're in the process of learning English for some of them the first time. That being said, others do have some English, and others are actually very proficient. So it's kind of like they're all over the place, and they're all in different schools. So some districts, when they have a higher population of students, they can create classes to teach English. The difficulty with a small district like RSU 5, especially when they're all in different grades, is that you can't really create a classroom for students who need to learn English because there's only like 1 or 2 of them. And so it means that the staff we have really kind of go from school to school, providing the services almost like 1 to 2 and sometimes 1 to 1 with some of the students. So this ask is really for a full-time person for next year.
Questions for Bonnie on that one? Jill?
Could you just clarify for me, is this ask different from the full-time position that was just advertised, or is it the same one?
So the position that was just advertised was really only through the end of this year because we're using, contingency money is my understanding. So there isn't a full-time position in the budget. So this would be a new position for next year.
But it could be the same, like if we were able to get somebody now, this would basically be their funding to continue?
It could be, yep.
Yep, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions for Bonnie on that? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, so I'm trying to remember what Will said to me before we started, if they were going to go over other requests or information for each of the schools, if they were just going to do that group ask for those positions. So I'm just going to say Lisa and see if she comes up.
Although the only request is that intervention group for power.
Yeah, I mean, usually one of the other things they do is kind of go over the prior asks, but this chart is a little bit different, so. You coming up, Lisa? We're going to enjoy your company while we have you, Lisa.
I'm counting down the board meeting, so so thank you for last year. You were able to fund 2/10, which is the equivalent of 1 extra day of math RTI. As a result, we've been able to provide extra support for students that need it at every grade level. You may remember that the ask last year came because we were having to prioritize at certain grade levels because we didn't have enough support. So that's been very helpful. The other item that was in the budget for us last year was a civil rights team. I'm happy to report we have 14 third through fifth graders who are very actively involved and providing lots of support for the rest of our school through our civil rights team. So those were 2 wonderful additions to Pownell Elementary. Any questions?
Questions for Lisa?
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Julie Nickerson, Moore Street School.
Okay, so I only have one, but they're connected. 2, but they're connected as one, as additional ask. But last year, we were fortunate to get an additional second grade teacher due to our increased enrollment in that grade. And that's going great, thank you. And then we had an additional stipend for a civil rights team. And this actually took us some work to get up and running at the K2 level. And in fact, the first meeting of this team will be on Friday. And the 2 people with the stipend, they're sharing a stipend, have worked really hard in the first part of the year in 2 ways. So the civil rights teams are sanctioned by the state at the 3 to 5 grade levels only for a reason. Like there's a lot of not developmentally appropriate things for K2. So we've done a lot of kind of consulting, talking, researching about what is appropriate for K2 to be doing. And so Kelly Herzog, our school counselor, and Hannah Gottlieb, one of our kindergarten teachers, are teaming on, they've decided to call it community helpers. And so they'll meet this week with the students to determine kind of the whole idea behind it also is that it's student driven and student led. And so they'll be supporting those students through whatever they decide to come up with to make our school welcoming and supportive place for everybody. So I'll hopefully have more to report once we're kind of up and running and have that under our belts. But those 2 people also have been key in leading our adult work around our equity work too. So the additional asks on top of the intervention team are really for additional secretarial time. I think Emily had already asked, has the parallel ask from last week. I think we found that both our schools, we really just need a second person there every day. So that's the first ask of the increase of the 3 hours a week. And then additional days in the summer for Michelle, particularly to, with 2 intake grades, pre-K, we have intake at K as well as pre-K. There's just a lot of things that need to be put into the system and be ready for school to be open. Any questions for me?
Thank you.
Bye.
And Will.
Okay, so this might be the steepest, whatever it's called. It's not a podium. Yeah, obviously designed before laptops. I think it was made before laptops, to be honest with you. All right, so to begin with, just to recap last year's budget asks that we received. You may recall that we had 2 years ago added a 0.5 guidance position around, really because of the range of our 10 grade levels and the population of our school. And then its initial implementation had been through grant funds, and then last year it was the same position, but that funding shifted to local. That continues to be a very necessary role and a great contributor to supporting the students and families throughout the age ranges. We added 2 civil rights team stipends, and we have 2 civil rights teams running. I think we're hosting, for those people who come up to visit pretty soon, you'll get a chance to see and sit in with some civil rights team work. And those student groups do a great job of considering the school culture and things that could contribute to improving school culture or making sure that all students are feeling welcomed and safe at school. We had shifted the administrative assistant hours to align with what the other schools had, they can, to be honest with you, there are not enough hours in the day or the year for what they have to complete at the moment, but certainly getting that aligned time was very helpful. And the other piece that we had made the adjustment on was we had moved a half-time ed tech role up into a half-time teacher role around literacy RTI. And that has been very beneficial. The work that is being provided there, interestingly enough, mostly around our youngest students and trying to get them to where they need to be by the age of 8 and 9 is where that is really targeted. So those pieces have certainly paid off in the way that we had hoped and anticipated and play an integral part of the school on a daily basis. For us as a school this year, we actually have a significant number of asks compared to previous years. You'll see in the notes the student population is anticipated to be similar to this year, 466. As we look over the history of the school, there's been a slow growth over the last 5 years, from 420 students to 466. Obviously, a part of that was the addition of a 3rd pre-K section, but there's also been increases across all the grade levels. Over this period of time, we've gone from 5 of our 10 grade levels requiring 3 sections to now 8 of our 10 grade levels require 3 sections. Oftentimes, we hit an awkward number. As you'll recall or may recall, for this school year, we'd gone into the year with our current first grade right on the cusp. So with 41 children anticipated, we felt confident at 20 and 21, but if there was any increase, those numbers suddenly add up quite quickly. So we had proactively added an ed tech this year that would support the first grade classrooms. Thankfully we did, because we're now at 46. It seemed like everybody who bought a house in Durham this year also got a free first grader within the bargain and a place at school. So first grade was a very popular selling point in the real estate market. So with that, we are still in those sort of awkward numbers where it's just too many for 2, So it's relatively small for 3, but too big for 2. And so, it's tricky. We look to maximize what we can. We've obviously already talked about the early intervention team. So I'll speak to some of the other items that we're looking to ask for, and you can see them listed on the sheet there. In guidance, I just talked about the added half day, half a position. We're looking to add 1.5 days per counselor, so just those 2 counselors. And where we see that 1.5 days is that we've had a lot of people, there's been quite a lot of move-ins, or movement, I should say, in the community of Durham, people moving out, moving in. And as people come in during the summer, our guidance counselors currently work the school year, and preparing and greeting and supporting new families is sort of an integral part of the work. So, for example, we will communicate with and talk with and connect with incoming pre-kindergarten children or kindergarten children. But people who move in over the summer, although we always welcome them to come in for visits, the piece that we think is lacking has been around sort of parent connections and family interviews that will really help place the child appropriately and also support the family's needs or questions or concerns moving into a new school. So how we envision that is actually 6 half days that we can provide in the month of August for families to come in or to be connected with or to meet with. So that's the intent of that particular ask. We are looking to add some stipend positions. 2 in the technology integrator roles. We currently have 1 position across 10 grade levels, and we just cannot address the kind of developmental needs or the technology usage in that manner, because these are stipend positions. So this is somebody who's a full-time teacher who then looks to support their colleagues with the implementation of technology. Last year, obviously, as a district, we made a big investment in technology. Not that that will always be renewed, but whilst it's still current enough technology, we'd like to be able to maximize the usage of what we do have. So currently, our tech integrator role really focuses on the 6th through 8th grade MLTI laptops. We're asking to add 2 more stipends, one which would focus on K2 and the use of the iPads, one which would focus on 3-5, and the use of the Chromebooks that we have available, and what with that sort of developmental instruction, as well as how do we maximize the sort of creativity and return on those devices. In addition to those stipend positions, we're looking at 3 additional leadership stipends. We currently have a leadership role across 2 grade levels, just because, again, it's the 10 grade level piece that kind of becomes a factor. So we have a pre-KK leader, a 1-2, 3-4, 5-6, special ed, and specials. And increasingly the work we do is we're looking at student growth data and progress monitoring student growth. It really does come down to grade level work. So when the teams meet together, which is our current structure, it means that you're generally looking at one group or another group. And as we continue to move towards this goal around student data and teacher efficacy, we think we'd benefit from having a leader at each grade level. And so we think we're fine at 7-8 and we're fine at pre-KK. The 3 roles would really enable it to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, as opposed to a 1, 2, a 3, 4, a 5, 6. And as I say, that really is to try and then maximize their PLC time around looking at instructional practices and student growth. The last stipend area we're looking at is a yoga club stipend. We have piloted it this year. We weren't running outing club this year just because of the challenges at the beginning of the year in terms of availability and access to different locations, concern obviously about what was unfolding with COVID. So we had used that stipend money to pilot a yoga club that is offered pre-K through 8 in different sections. and well, not pre-K, I beg your pardon, but K through 8 as an after-school activity. And it's been very popular. Children have been signing up and enjoying the different sessions and participating. So we would like to make that an ongoing offering at school. There's a specific request from our librarian for some additional book money for this year. And I hate to say I sound like a broken record. I'm feeling like a broken record here, but the one of the pieces is for her, as she's been reviewing the collection, is that buying for a certain grade span, sometimes you can cover a span quite well because there's a cross level of interest between 2 or 3 grade levels that obviously doesn't exist right up to the across the whole span we have. So there's some gaps in the collection that she would like to address and get that up and running. So she does that every year through her regular purchases, tries to meet and fit in where those gaps exist, but this would give a boost to try and fill some significant gaps that she sees in the collection. You see the enrollment numbers there. And the other piece that is significant to be aware of is that we need to add a teaching position. It doesn't increase the number of teachers at our school, but what we have this year is a teaching role that was funded through COVID relief funds. It's currently in our 7th and 8th grade rotation to bring class sizes down to a smaller number that would allow spacing. That role is just on a 1-year only funded position. What we have to do is address the group that's going into 2nd grade. So our current 1st grade, we had anticipated them as 2 moving forward. As I mentioned to you earlier, that has now become a large enough group to require 3 classrooms, and that's where the need exists. So the new position would actually go into 1st grade, and the 3 teachers currently in 2nd grade would remain there, whereas we had anticipated a year ago that one of those 2nd grade teachers would roll down to 1st grade to pick up a bigger group coming out of kindergarten. So it's not an additional role at the school, but it's similar to how that guidance role worked, which is that it was federally funded as a position, and we now need to make that a permanent position, at least as the numbers are now. Any questions or clarification I could provide?
I don't see the dollar amount for the library request on here. Am I missing it?
Yeah.
Oh, I have it on mine.
Oh, it's in the other section. Okay. Oh, the 1,500. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yep.
I just look at the charts.
I just have a quick question about the stipends. Have those been approved already by the stipend committee?
The yoga club one has not yet been approved. It's gone to that. We've written up a piece for it, but I'm not sure where it is in that process. The other ones are existing. Those stipends exist. The roles exist. It's just a question of if we fund them, then we would be able to fill them. But the yoga one is a new one from a district stipend.
I'm curious about the leadership stipends and 1 per grade level. How does that compare to the other schools?
Well, it's not quite. So there's more than 1 per grade level in some of the schools, but obviously they have bigger grade levels. So it's in terms of the number of staff they would be kind of providing leadership over or responsibility for students, this would be a smaller ratio, but in terms of grade span, it would be an equivalent ratio. Okay. That's kind of the rub. So we've tried to do it where it's more comparable to the number of teachers. But 5 to 6 teachers, which might be a grade level at a bigger, a more clustered school, is 2 grade levels for us, and that's where we're just not seeing the ability to do what we want to do. And so part of this, we'd worked through how could we position ourselves. What we're trying to do is create a structure and systems that support the where we're trying to get to with being responsive to student data and student growth. And so part of that was looking at time. So time is always the big factor, right? So we started by looking at how can we create more time or adjust time to provide teachers with more time.
How'd that go for you?
Yeah, pretty much as you would predict. And, you know, so when we are pulling the schedule apart, we are trying everything to how can you just nuance little bits? But then the way we approached it with this was, one thing we could do is also look at how do we maximize the time we currently have. And that's actually a lot cheaper to do than to try and pay people to work extra time. And so that's what led to this sort of proposal, is that the strategy we're employing here is, will this work to maximize what time we have so that the teacher's work can be more focused and right around them and their students? And if so, it's a model we would look to stick with. If it doesn't, then it's a model we probably would revert back out of. So,
Maddie.
Thank you, Will. I had a similar question to Valley because we haven't met as a stipend committee for a while, but I don't recall that particular stipend for the technology integrator. So maybe I'm just forgetting something. I just wanted to note to Jenny that could we maybe add that to our agenda for a couple of weeks when we meet, just to refresh my memory or refresh our memory. But my question for you, Will, is what you're asking for in the 2 additional tech integrators, is that comparable to what we have in the other schools?
So again, it varies. So I don't know. I think it's probably more than some of the other elementaries. Freeport Middle School has 3 tech integrators. They have 1 at each grade level. And what we're looking at is 1 that would serve 3 grade levels each. And so I think Maddie, probably why it's not something you're so familiar with is that these roles really initiated out of the MLTI program, which of course has now been around for about 20 years. So, and at that time, these sort of roles were put into play very much around supporting staff with maximizing the sort of, or leveraging what technology could offer. And there wasn't really technology per se at our lower levels, our primary and elementary grade levels. We now have it. And again, I'm not sure for how many years it's going to be operable and useful, but we don't feel that we're maximizing the potential it has, partly because there's no one really available to take the lead and make it happen. So again, these are roles that might phase out as the technology ages out, because if we don't replace, I mean, we've had sort of 5 iPads in a classroom, for example, to support, but we've not had a scenario where a whole class can be utilizing technology simultaneously. And if that doesn't become, if that kind of access to technology phases out, then the role probably phases out. But while we have it, it seems like to make the most of what we got, it's worth filling it.
Jen.
So this kind of goes back to Michelle's point that we talked about when we were talking about the early intervention, is that, I was thinking a lot about it. We add teachers when we have, our numbers increase, but we don't a lot of times look at all the other pieces. And looking at these numbers for Durham, my youngest is a senior in high school, and she was the first group that had this bubble of needing 3 teachers. And so to see on this how much you've grown, and that all of these grade levels now are requiring 3 teachers, you know, it is one thing to ask for the teachers, and then another thing to look at, like you said, the technology. You know, there used to be one person that did technology for the whole school. We still, just last year, added a 0.5 guidance counselor when looking at how much the population has increased, and we just did that last year. So, you know, I think that just, you know, it's just a comment of perspective to look at when you're adding all of these things. It's sort of in conjunction with, you know, every time you add a teacher, you do need to kind of look at where you need, you know, other things to rise too. So I think sometimes it looks like, oh, we just, you know, want to add another half of a guidance counselor. But when you look back historically, how much the population has grown, it's just really important. So, you know, I know, you know, a lot of people look at this and say, oh, these stipends, but it's very clear with the population growing in Durham, how necessary it is to have those. So appreciate that.
As I mentioned, it does sound like a broken record, but I can't emphasize enough that just the sort of nuance and uniqueness of having 10 grade levels in one school, it makes it harder. Every group needs the same level of attention that would be required across 3 schools here in town. And for one person to do it all, as you can imagine, it's a compromise. And so there are times when that's fine. We can certainly make that happen. And there's certain benefits too. I mean, we know the children very well, and it allows us sometimes to take a step back and see that trajectory of growth, and be able to like lift them over the 10 years. But there are other aspects to it where you know, it can't be quite as effective, and that compromise ends up getting to a point where it hits a tipping point. We're like, okay, when at this point, we're now compromising kids and learning. Therefore, we've got to look at what we do to address it.
I'm always amazed by the specialists in particular. Like, I mean, I couldn't imagine lesson planning for a pre-K art class and then all the way up through an 8th grade art class or a gym class or any of them, really. I mean, I'm always astonished by their versatility.
Yeah, and it's not just then the planning, it's actually how your teaching style, your language, your affect, your expectations, the developmental kind of phases they go through each and every day, because they experience all of the different age groups. It's remarkable how well they do it.
Other questions for Will? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we don't have any new business or personnel, so we are back to our second public comment. Same process as the first. I don't know if anybody has anything they'd like to share. Just ask you to come up, give your name, where you're from, and please keep comments to 3 minutes.
Me again. I first want to preface this comment just by saying I'm fully in support of any school initiative that makes learning and education equity across all of our students. I certainly am fully in support of all of that. But I would just like to suggest that you consider one extra data point in all of that you've been asking, and that is comparing the needs that you're seeing right now with learning development and need for extra attention or early intervention, all of that. Compare that data point to 2019, before you required our students to wear masks and before you required them to, work digitally from home. All of those things, specifically the masks, are going to have a huge effect on all of that. Like I said in my speech, the learning in pre-K and kindergarten, they rely on facial expression. They rely on seeing your face move, and they can't see any of that. They don't even know what their teachers look like. They don't know what a lot of their friends look like. And so that's why you're seeing decline. There was a speech pathologist in Florida who said her referrals are up 300% for kids in kindergarten and pre-K. 300% since wearing masks. So I encourage you to consider that data point. Let's remove masks and see if there's an improvement before we spend $250,000 or whatever that is. See if that does the trick. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, then I would take a motion to adjourn. Susanna? Jill, thank you. All those in favor? Great. Thank you, everybody.